The wind was a blade against the world, sharpening itself on the bones of the prairie. It flayed the last stubborn leaves from the cottonwoods and screamed across the flat, hardpan earth where Elias Cole's homestead clung like a stubborn burr. Inside the small cabin, the fire in the hearth was his only answer to the blizzard's siege. It spat and crackled, a tame and captive sun against the raging white oblivion outside. Elias moved with the economy of a man who had long ago shed every unnecessary gesture. He checked the seal on the window, his breath a brief cloud against the cold glass. His reflection was a ghost superimposed on the storm, a man etched with a sorrow so deep it had become part of his bones. He was a creature of routine, of quiet penance. Each day he worked the land that had taken everything from him, his labor a silent, unending prayer to the 2 small mounds of earth on the hill overlooking the house. The storm had been tearing at the world for 2 days, burying his fences and turning the landscape into a formless, hostile sea of white. He was preparing to turn in when a flicker of wrongness snagged his eye, a dark shape against the snow near the southern fence line. It was a shape that didn't belong. He pulled on his heavy coat, the sheepskin collar rough against his jaw, and grabbed the lantern. The wind met him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs and driving ice into his skin. He leaned into it, his boots sinking deep, the lantern's light a fragile, swinging globe in the maelstrom. It was a horse, down on its side, its breath coming in ragged, steaming plumes. But it was the smaller, huddled shapes behind the animal's failing body that made his heart lurch with a cold, unwelcome jolt. A woman, her face pale as bone china, was curled around a small boy, her own body a desperate, failing shield against the cold. The boy was still, his face buried in her coat. Elias didn't hesitate. He knelt, his gloved hands brushing the snow from the woman's face. Her eyes fluttered open, dark and vast with a terror that went deeper than the cold. He saw the fight in them, the last ember of a will to survive. "I mean you no harm," he said, his voice a low rumble lost to the wind. She didn't seem to hear. He gathered the boy first, a bundle of near-frozen limbs that weighed almost nothing. The child didn't stir. Elias carried him to the cabin, the short distance a brutal pilgrimage against the storm. He laid the boy on the hearth rug, close to the fire but not too close, and went back out. The woman had tried to rise, her movements feeble, a testament to her fierce spirit. He lifted her, his arms remembering a weight they had tried for years to forget. She was light, fragile, but he could feel the tension in her, the rigid defiance of a trapped animal. Inside, the warmth was a shock. He laid her on his own cot, pulling the rough wool blankets over her. He worked methodically, stripping the boy's wet clothes and wrapping him in a dry blanket. He checked the child's breathing, relieved to find it shallow but steady. He turned to the woman. Her eyes were open, tracking his every move. He saw a gash on her forearm, dark blood crusted against the torn fabric of her sleeve. He went to the stove, ladling warm water into a basin. When he returned, she flinched. "Let me," he said. It was not a question. He cut away the sleeve with his pocket knife and gently cleaned the wound. His touch was sure, practiced, impersonal. He worked in silence, aware of her gaze, a silent, ceaseless interrogation. The boy, wrapped by the fire, coughed, a dry, rasping sound. The woman tried to sit up, a raw sound of panic in her throat. "He's warm," Elias said, his voice quiet but firm. "Let him be." He finished bandaging her arm and placed a cup of water on the small crate beside the cot. She didn't take it. He retreated, giving her the space she seemed to crave more than air. He sat in his own chair by the fire, a sentinel in his own home, and watched the rhythm of their breathing in the flickering light. The storm raged on, trapping them in an enforced intimacy, 3 solitary souls adrift in a sea of white. The silence in the cabin was heavier than the snow piling up against the door. It was a silence filled with unspoken questions and deep-seated fears. The woman, who he would learn was named Ilara, remained on the cot, her watchfulness a palpable force. The boy, Finn, woke but did not speak. He stayed by the fire, his small body rigid, his eyes fixed on his mother. When Elias offered him a piece of bread, the boy shrank back, burying his face in the blanket. Alara spoke for the first time, her voice a dry whisper. "He won't." Elias simply left the bread on the hearth. Hours later, he saw the boy's small hand creep out and take it. Days bled into one another, measured by the rising and falling of the wind. Elias resumed his chores, the rhythmic work a comfort. He would chop wood, tend the fire, milk his single cow. Each time he left the cabin, he felt Alara's tension spike. Each time he returned, he saw the flicker of relief in her eyes she tried so hard to hide. She began to move about the small space, her steps hesitant. She would add a log to the fire when he was outside or wash the few dishes in the basin. They were small acts, acknowledgments of a fragile, unspoken truce. They communicated in gestures. A nod of thanks when he placed a bowl of stew before her. The slight softening of her jaw when he left a freshly whittled piece of wood, smoothed into the shape of a bird, near the hearth for the boy. Finn took the bird, his small fingers tracing its simple lines, but his silence remained absolute. One afternoon, the storm abated, the wind's scream softening to a low moan. The world outside was a pristine, blinding expanse of white. Elias went out to mend a section of fence that had been damaged. He worked for hours, the repetitive motion of stretching wire and pounding posts a familiar solace. When he looked back at the cabin, he saw Alara standing in the doorway, watching him. Beside her, Finn stood, holding the wooden bird. For the first time, she did not look like a cornered animal. She looked like a woman watching a man mend a fence. The next day, he found Finn standing by the window, his gaze fixed on the two small mounds on the hill. The snow had dusted them, softening their stark outlines. Elias came and stood beside the boy, his shoulder almost touching the child's small head. He said nothing. He simply stood there, sharing the view, a silent communion of loss. Finn did not flinch from his presence. That night, a nightmare clawed its way out of Elias's past. The smell of smoke, the sound of splintering wood, a woman's scream that was his wife's, a child's cry that was his son's. He woke with a strangled gasp, his heart hammering against his ribs, the sheets damp with sweat. He sat in the darkness, the ghosts of his family swirling around him. In the morning, he found a cup of cool water on the floor outside his sleeping space. He knew it was from her. He drank it down, the simple act of care, a balm on a wound he thought could never be soothed. The breaking of the weather meant they could leave. Alara packed their few meager belongings into a small bundle. The dread was a physical weight in her chest. Leaving the relative safety of this quiet man's cabin meant returning to the run, to the constant fear of being found. She approached him as he sat cleaning his rifle. "We should go," she said, her voice stronger than it had been. He looked up, his gray eyes searching her face. Where? The question hung in the air. Where could she go that he wouldn't find her? The truth felt like a betrayal of this man's quiet kindness, a contamination of his sanctuary. But his steady gaze demanded it. "I am running," she said, the words costing her. "From a man. Silas. He was my husband's partner. When my husband died, Silas said he owned everything. He said that included me." And Finn, she shuddered, the memory of Silas's cold, possessive touch making her skin crawl. "He is not a man who lets go of his property." Elias's face hardened, but not at her. It was a deep, cold anger, the anger of a man who understood brutality. He had seen it in war, had seen it in the senseless tragedy that had stolen his own family. He saw the same hunted look in her eyes that he saw in the mirror every morning. He set the rifle down. "Stay," he said. It was not a command, but an offer. "Until you're strong. The roads are still bad." She looked at him, at the sparse, clean cabin, at the fire burning steadily in the hearth. She looked at Finn, who was watching them both, his expression unreadable. For the first time in months, she allowed a sliver of hope to pierce her despair. She nodded, a single, sharp movement. A new routine settled over them, quieter, more domestic. Alara found a small patch of earth near the cabin wall where the sun had melted the snow and began to clear it, her hands working the cold soil as if she could pull life from it. Elias showed Finn how to sharpen a whittling knife, his large, calloused hands guiding the boy's small ones. They worked in comfortable silence, the scrape of the knife on wood a peaceful sound. One evening, as twilight painted the snow in shades of purple and gray, Alara found Elias standing on the hill, looking down at the two graves. She walked up and stood beside him, the cold air crisp between them. "My Sarah," he said, his voice rough with disuse and memory. "And little Caleb, a fire. I was in town for supplies." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. The 3 sentences were a lifetime of grief. He had offered her the names of his ghosts, the heaviest thing he owned. She accepted them with the reverence they deserved, her silence a promise to guard them. In that moment, she saw the life they could have here, a fragile, mended thing built from the shattered pieces of their pasts. But the thought was poisoned by fear. Her presence here was a ticking clock, counting down to the moment Silas would inevitably arrive and destroy this piece, too. The day was bright and clear, the sky a piercing blue. The illusion of peace was so complete it was almost believable. Elias was splitting logs, the rhythmic thud of the axe a steady heartbeat for the homestead. Alara was hanging laundry on a line she'd strung, the clean white sheets brilliant against the snow. Finn was on the porch, carefully carving a new piece of wood. The sound of hoofbeats was faint at first, then clearer, more purposeful. Not the slow gait of a wandering rider. 3 men, dark figures against the white landscape, approaching the cabin. Alara's heart seized. She recognized the man in the lead, his posture arrogant even at a distance. "Silas." She grabbed Finn, pulling him inside the cabin. "Stay down," she whispered, her voice tight with terror. Elias had already seen them. He lowered his axe, his body going still, every line of him coiled with a dangerous readiness. He walked slowly to the porch, picking up the rifle he'd left leaning against the wall. Silas reined in his horse a few yards from the cabin, his men fanning out behind him. He had a cruel, handsome face and eyes that held no warmth at all. He smiled, a thin, predatory expression. "Alara, my dear," he called out, his voice smooth and condescending. "This foolish game is over. Come out. Bring the boy." Elias stepped forward, the rifle held loosely at his side. "She's not going with you." Silas's gaze shifted to Elias, dismissing him. "This doesn't concern you, farmer. This is a private family matter." "You're on my land," Elias said, his voice flat and cold as ice. "That makes it my concern." Leave. Silas's smile vanished. "I don't think so." He gave a slight nod to his men. The world exploded into violence. It was not the drawn-out drama of a gunfight. It was swift, brutal, and ugly. One of Silas's men went for his gun, and Elias's rifle cracked once. The man fell from his saddle. The second man charged, dismounting to use the porch for cover. Elias moved with a soldier's deadly grace, using the woodpile as a shield, his movements economical and lethal. Inside, Alara barred the door, her body shaking. She could hear the shouts, the sickening thud of a body hitting the ground. Then the back window shattered. Silas was climbing through, his face contorted with rage. He lunged for her, grabbing her arm. "You will learn to obey me," he hissed. Finn screamed, a raw, terrified sound. Silas turned, his eyes landing on the boy. A cruel smile touched his lips. "The boy first, I think. He needs to learn who his father is now." He lunged for Finn, but Alara reacted with a ferocity he had never seen. She grabbed the cast-iron skillet from the stove and swung it with all her strength, connecting with the side of his head. He staggered back, stunned, blood trickling from his temple. Outside, the second man was down, and Elias was turning back toward the cabin just as Silas stumbled out the front door, dragging Alara with him. He held a knife to her throat. "Drop the rifle, farmer, or she dies." Elias slowly lowered the rifle. In that moment of distraction, Finn darted out from the cabin, clutching a piece of firewood. He ran at Silas, swinging the wood with a desperate cry and hitting him hard on the back of the knee. Silas buckled, his grip on Alara loosening for a fraction of a second. It was all Elias needed. He moved, closing the distance in 3 long strides. The fight was short and savage. Elias disarmed Silas, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't kill him. He slammed him against the porch post, the impact knocking the air from Silas's lungs. "Get off my land?" Elias growled, his voice a low threat. The aftermath was a field of silent devastation. Elias tied Silas and his conscious, groaning man with rope from the barn, leaving them for the marshal he would fetch from town tomorrow. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows that looked like bruises on the snow. Inside, the silence was thick with shock. Elias sat at the table, methodically cleaning a shallow cut on his arm. Alara was sweeping up the shattered glass, the small, repetitive motion a way to keep her hands from shaking. Finn, who had hidden under the cot after his moment of bravery, slowly emerged. He walked not to his mother, but to Elias. He stood before the quiet, wounded man and held out his hand. In his palm was the newly whittled figure of a wolf, small but perfectly formed. Elias looked at the boy, then gently took the offering. Finn looked up at him, his small face serious, his eyes full of a new, dawning understanding. And then he spoke, his voice small but clear in the quiet room. Elias, it was the first word he had spoken in almost a year. Later, when the lamps were lit and a fragile peace had settled back over the cabin, Alara found Elias on the hill again. He was not looking at the graves of his past, but out at the vast, darkening prairie. She stood beside him, the silence between them comfortable now, forged in shared violence and survival. She knew what she had to say, the final, honest truth of the burden she carried. "Your time is over if you marry me," she whispered to the wind. It was a warning, a penance, an offering of freedom to the man who had saved her. He would never be truly safe with her. Silas, or men like him, would always be a shadow at their backs. Elias turned to look at her, his face softened by the twilight. He saw not a burden, but a woman of incredible strength. He saw a boy who had found his voice again. He saw the faint, terrifying outline of a future. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm and firm around hers. A smile touched his lips, the first genuine smile she had ever seen on his face. It was weary, it was tinged with sorrow, but it was real. "Let's end it together," he said. And she knew he wasn't talking about an end, but a beginning. The end of running, the end of solitude, the end of a life governed by ghosts. Together, they would build a new one on the hard, open land, a found family under the vast and watchful sky.